Imagine this. Your thoughts, your beliefs, your feelings. This is your house. But is it your home? Hi, I'm Nelson DeMello, and join me as we try to find our home beyond our borders. I don't know. I think that's fine.
Yeah, that's a good take.
Guys, this is Vanessa.
Hi.
I can't, I don't know if I should say. We're acquainted, and I think that's it. That's all I can say. But yeah, you seem like an interesting person. So here we go. Okay. Tell me about your upbringing.
So, God,
It's okay.
Okay, so I guess, my upbringing, I was originally, born in Corpus. I don't know if that's...
Corpus Christi?
Yeah, Corpus Christi.
Nice.
It was with just my mother. My dad and my mom were never together really. And I spent a couple years there with her, and then she was very young. She had me when she was 15 or 16. So, that didn't really go out very well. And then my dad lived with his parents, so my grandparents. And, after those couple of years, they basically were just she didn't really take care of me. So they took her to court, fought for my custody. While that was going on, I stayed in a foster home for a few months.
Yeah.
And then, they did win the case with me. So then I just started living with, my dad, my grandparents. My dad has always been kind of an alcoholic. So he's never really been a real big father figure. So my grandparents just, raised me. They are all Catholic, although we never went to church. Church wasn't a thing. It was just, I believe in the Lord, and that's about as
the
religious.
Extent of their,
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
And then, just me growing up was a little toxic. My mother, not being a part of my life was just really detrimental to me and mentally. So it really messed me up. It's just kind of oh, my mom doesn't want me. My own mother doesn't want me, who would? And, my dad just being an alcoholic, it was just a little traumatizing. And the way that I grew up was just lots of, Mexican parties, lots of alcohol, lots of drugs. And that just kind of, I don't know, made me really secluded. We were a family of 7 living in a 3-bedroom household. So, quite full. We always had a lot of people there. I didn't have my own bedroom. I slept on the couch my entire childhood, just always just living in the living room. So that really just kind of secluded me from having friends, because I was always embarrassed that I didn't have...
Invite people over and be like, this is where I sleep.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't have my own personal space. So that I always grew up just very sheltered, very shy. And there was always just a lot of fights and attitude going on. My grandfather was an Army veteran, so he was a bit of a hard ass. And my uncle, who was he's only a couple years older than me, he was a bit of an asshole growing up. He was also adopted, so I think that really messed with him mentally as well. So we used to fight a lot. He used to pretty much beat me when I was a kid. And so not only that, but he and his adoptive father, they used to get into fights, fist fights, all the time. So there was just a lot of violence, a lot of alcohol, a lot of drugs growing up. But that's pretty much the extent of it.
That actually, it reminds me of my dad's life a little bit. He found out that his mom tried to abort him when he was 10. And so then he decided to live with his dad, right? Because they were getting a divorce at the same time. And then the dad was like, hey, your mom tried to abort you. That's why you have those, the scars and all that stuff. And he did that, but his dad was like a raging gambler. So he would never see his dad. And so it just like that aspect of like your options are really just trashy, no matter where you go. And as a kid, you don't have that choice of being like, I'm just going to be independent and, take care of myself or whatever, because you need somebody to take care of you. And that's really messed up. But it didn't sound like you said anything bad about your grandma.
No, she was kind of like the saving grace of our family.
Yeah.
She was always really sweet, typical Mexican, like mom. And honestly, I don't even call her grandma. I call her mom because that's the only mom figure that I had in my life. So my mom was, always taking care of everyone, making us home cooked meals every day, always keeping things clean. And she was just very, very sweet. And I feel like I got a lot of like, I'm a very caring person, and I care a lot about people, and I try my best to, be there for people. And I really do think I got a lot of that from my mother.
Yeah. That's awesome. I remember, this is kind of a rehashing of our conversation, but you mentioned like, okay, you have, the tattoos, the purple hair and this and that. And what did this affect maybe a little bit of you like not wanting to go to church or being judged, or was there any relationship that you had with like church that you're just like, they don't like me, I'm not for them? And, was there any of that, or because you're saying your grandparents didn't really go to church. So was that, was that a factor in any of that?
So I think with that, I wouldn't say that was too much of a factor. I think it was just the fact that we just didn't really grow up, like, going to church, and there really wasn't a lot of, like, anything religious, like, being talked about whatsoever. It was just, like, the casual, well, this is God's plan type stuff. And
Gotcha.
I think I went to church once, don't really remember it. I don't know. I've just always kind of like thought of it as a joke, probably because, if my family doesn't like take it seriously enough, like, why should I? And pretty early on, I actually knew that I was attracted to women. And my uncle, we were like kind of close, because it's kind of like a brother, and, siblings fight. So even through all of that, we were somewhat close, and he knew that I was attracted to women, and he had basically just decided to out me to the family. And that was a huge discussion. My grandfather was just like very much was not happy about it, and was just like, oh, you're the daughter of the devil, and Yikes. Like, can you really like see yourself like going down on a girl and stuff? And I was just like, yes, I can.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But it was just like the way that they just like really turned against me. And I just, that also just left a really sour taste in my mouth.
Yeah. I think, there's a few things there. I think there's this, at least pastors really try to push that narrative of like, one, I mean, there's a lot of Christians that don't show up like on Sundays, right? And that already is a huge leap. Being committed to a community of believers, being committed to learning and receiving, is one leap. But then there is a second leap to be done, which is when you take that faith and take ownership of it, and then go on that journey on your own and trying to discover and trying to do that. And there's a very small percentage of Christians, honestly, that go down that road, because for a lot of us, it is just a cultural thing. It's just something that we believe in, and it's honestly no different than being a part of any subculture. And so it's like, it's that weird thing, and we talked a little bit about this, where like, the Bible is clear about certain things, but I think the argument and the pushback from that mostly comes from homophobia, right? And not in this place of like, hey, like we all have desires that don't completely align to God's will. And like, I just feel like there's a separation for a lot of people instead of saying, oh, what you're going through is what I'm going through. Right. And like we've talked about, for me specifically, like it's not that far off. Right. And so I can literally say, oh, what I'm going through isn't that different from, what you're going through. And then the second thing I thought about is, I don't remember. So what we will continue on talking about that. And so how did that express itself? What was going through your mind? And was there a part of you that didn't want it to be true? Walk me through that.
So I was actually always okay with what I was attracted to. I never once felt ashamed for what I liked. In school, I was very open. And I discovered this, in middle school. So I discovered this very early on. And I was always very open about it in school. But with my family, I never really felt cared about or listened to. They always kind of just pushed me to the side, really, never really listened to me. And when it came to, fights with my uncle, it was always just well, just give in to him. What does he want? Let's just let him kind of, and you just be the passive one. And so in my mind, whenever that happened, I felt, hurt and offended that you went as far as to call me the daughter of the devil just because I like women. And that really was just I was just really taken back by that. Some of my family, like my dad and my aunt, who I'm really close to, were very understanding about it. They still accepted me, but it was my grandparents who are just more old-fashioned that were just disgusted by it, basically.
Yeah. And I think what stuck out to me is the fact that they wouldn't listen, they wouldn't hear you out. Because I think there's a difference between agreeing and listening, trying to understand, which I don't know. Then this is the fine line where I tried to I struggle with, which is I totally understand, totally relate, and I have empathy when I listen. I do, but then in the back of my mind, which I guess for some Christians they think oh, it's not far enough into your mind, it's not in the forefront of your mind enough that it's wrong, right? Because that to me is secondary to what's going on, and I've expressed my my life a little bit and how my sexuality was a little warped, and because of background things that I only realized when I started doing the work. I guess I gotta catch up the people. So basically, I was talking about how growing up, a lot of times feel attraction for any close friend that I had, regardless of gender identity or whatever the case was, and so. Looking into it and researching whatever, I came across, really it was a friend. And it's actually kind of interesting. I mean, this wasn't your case maybe, but for Chris, for him, it was a person that told him, hey, I think this is the thing for you. And then he looked it up and researched. He was like, oh, you're right. And so I think the same thing happened. I think what switched was I had a coworker, that was hearing me talk about this, and he's like, oh, that's pansexuality. I was like, what? I don't like pans, dude. What are you talking about? But then, and then I looked into it, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess so. But then, a few years later, doing therapy, not even trying to deal with the pansexuality, but realizing there was a correlation with my emotional need of growing up without a dad to be close with, because he was emotionally distant, that made my mind fuse those things, right? My sexual need with my emotional need. inappropriately, right? Because then I couldn't be with I couldn't be close to any friend without being like, attracted or anything. I was like, that's not cool. And so I made that correlation. Now, for you, at least if there is a pattern, I do somewhat see, the lack of having your actual mom, and then that emotional or that sexual desire. Like, do you think that's a valid correlation to make? Is that even, is that a thing, do you think?
No, I would agree. That really, I think, set the tone for a lot of me and like my relationships. And I've always been a very codependent person. And I think that stems from me, just feeling very isolated and unwanted, that I really saw a lot of people who, wanted me and, whatever aspect as a friend or, as a partner. So I think that that's very much where it stems from.
Yeah. And I know that from our past conversation that kind of evolved into pansexuality. So kind of that extension of the same thing, maybe the same realization of...
I think with that, so because in my household, it was just me and my mom. We were the only women. Everyone else was out of the family of 7. It was all boys. So I ended up getting exposed to like porno magazines, Playboy, and getting really exposed to like naked women. Which just kind of evolved into me exploring, and I found that stuff really young. Yeah.
Do you mind sharing how young?
I would say I was probably about 8 years old.
Whoa.
Once I learned that and learned about like self-gratification and stuff like that. So I think that was a huge point for me being attracted to women.
Yeah. And that it's a crazy thing when I look back in my life, it almost seems like there's like a concoction being brewed, right? Like I'd talk about a little bit of my narcissism and how like it only manifests itself or whatever, like in my late teens, maybe my early 20s. But like looking back, the recipe was always there. And it was just like, I just had to break the glass, you know what I mean? For everything to like explode, I guess. And it's such a interesting thing when we look back at our life in that sense. Is there anything you want to talk about?
I mean, really the only thing I didn't really touch on with my upbringing was another uncle that I had was a bit of and God, I don't know what to call it. Just he was very isolated, but he was very nerdy. So I grew up with like a lot of anime and video games.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
And that's kind of where a lot of my love for anime and games come.
Cool.
But that I feel like that also did, kind of expand on my sexuality a bit, because I don't know if you didn't understand that. No one's talking to you. That's why. Why was I does that?
It's okay.
A lot of like animes are like eki anime, and I don't know if you know what that means. It's so very sexual anime.
Gotcha.
Basically borderline hentai.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I feel like that also like just
like visually gratifying, all that.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. And then I guess I don't know. We also made that comment, and again, we might be rehashing a conversation, but you made the comment of, "Oh, Nelson, you're so analytical, and I don't like. How are you a Christian? That doesn't make sense." And so, I guess from that point, I don't know. Yeah, I feel like we're rehashing a conversation, but I don't know if there are questions that were unanswered, or maybe I should just like go on that rant again.
I mean, I don't know if I have questions. It's just more of just kind of interesting, because when I think of someone who's analytical, I don't think of them being very faithful, because it's more of like science over faith, I suppose.
Yeah.
So it's just like, just interesting. And I guess I am curious, like, how do you kind of like correlate the two? Because you seem like someone who would be like into scientific facts.
Yeah, I think so. In my early teens, late teens, early 20s, I kind of went through a faith crisis because I grew up kind of in a hellfire and brimstones kind of house. So I was trying to do everything, and we talked about this, right? I tried to do everything right, and in my head I was, and maybe I explained away any bad that I did. But I looked around, I was like, oh yeah, I don't do drugs, and I don't, do all these things. But there was a point where I just couldn't keep that up anymore. Mm-hmm. And I broke and then went off on the deep end. But even on the deep end, it was weird. It wasn't a faith crisis in terms of like, oh, I don't believe in God. It's like the God that I believe in can't be true. Mm-hmm. So I knew there was a God, but it was this thing of like, I needed to understand whoever God really is. I needed to understand who he was for myself to make the decision whether or not I wanted to follow him. So it was a thing of like, I knew he exists, but for some reason there was this notion that my upbringing did not reveal to me who God truly is. Mm-hmm. And so I read the Bible for myself a lot, like at least the New Testament, which like the point of Jesus and moving forward. I just read that over and over and over again, took notes, all this stuff. And to try to understand at least like, okay, let's say that all of this is real. Who is this person? And then I did that, right? And that was like way off. So yes, there's like God has an objective right and wrong. But yes, God is merciful. God is gracious. And how do you intertwine these two things? And that was like a process that I was going through. And so that led to a lot of mistakes in what we call like our theology. Mm-hmm. So basically like it's like the study of God, right? So basically it's like my Christian philosophy essentially, right? That led me to first be like extremely cold because again, the whole thing with my dad, I was like, oh, God is all powerful, all knowing, all good. He's just distant. Mm-hmm. And being distant, he can make clinical decisions that are the best for the world, whether we think it's good or not. Mm-hmm. And that was the relationship I had with God. Because that actually reflected my relationship with my dad, and I didn't realize it. And then, I don't know, that there was healing there. But then I went into this thing of like, oh, God is love and God is grace, so I'm going to do whatever I want. But then I realized, and we talked about this, I was basically worshiping an elevated version of myself, mm-hmm. right? And like, oh, God is just me, but the best. Mm-hmm. And that's not true. And then I sat in this place of, no, God is a completely different person. He has his own personality. He has his own mind. He has his own thing. And I have to learn who that is and worship that person. Mm-hmm. That's at least the process of like my faith. In process of the analytics, what ends up happening is there's so much circumstantial evidence surrounding the miracle of Jesus. So you can do like archaeology, like the walls of Jericho was an actual thing, and yeah, you can debate. Well, that's the thing. What's debated is like, oh, did the tower fall or whatever? And they did studies, and a possible explanation is that the bricks were loose on a wall. The sound was so loud that it vibrated the bricks, mm-hmm. and it fell down. So like there's like a scientific explanation. There's people who do this. It's called apologetics. So it's people who just defend Christianity from a scientific, mm-hmm. somewhat. It's either philosophical or scientific, because that's kind of the thing, right? It's because religion can transcend all of these things, or like are infused in all of these things. Mm-hmm. There's so many ways to prove it, and so when you look at that evidence, even the fact that like how does a religion, like how does one person create like a what do you call it? Like a ripple effect that changes the course of the world, you know? Like that it's in itself is like one thing that you're kind of mind blown about. But I think the strongest evidence, right? Like we can talk about, you know, a lot of like Noah's flood and, you know, how, okay, it might have not been the entire world, but that area, but then there's like Japanese stories of a flood. There's like, you know, English story, like old English, you know, Germanic, you know, tribes stories of floods or whatever. And it's like, okay, well, if all these people are saying there's a flood at a certain point in time, there's probably a flood. So things like that. So yeah, you just kind of the point is you get to a place where if you honestly look at the facts, you either have to have faith to not believe or have faith to believe. And regardless, to me, you're making a leap of faith regardless of what you're doing. Right. Because there's no bulletproof argument for either, you know? And when I sat with that, I did... Like, we've talked to, or I maybe just overheard you. You never watched Rick and Morty, right? No. But the way the way Rick is, he's like pseudo-intellectual, atheistic, you know, nihilistic, just this like really dark, like nothing really matters, you know, especially, and I understand his perspective. Like if there's infinite amount of universes, then like no one is really relevant because you can just go to a different universe and whatever, which is I'm going on this whole like analytical thing, which is ironic because he's like chasing his wife, you know, that doesn't exist in any universe. But the idea is like what you see in him is what you see in a lot of atheists, which is just a callousness, a coldness, and they hide behind this pseudo-intellectualism of saying, I just look at the facts and I stare at the facts, like cold stare at the, you know, at the face of these facts, and all I see is nothingness. And I'm willing to accept that. Well, the thing is like, without you really thinking about it, you're like implicitly choosing to be miserable. That's not an option. Like, or it is an option. It's not the only option, right? You can't reduce all of creation being like existing and saying, oh, it must be that none of this matters. Yeah, if there is no God, then yeah, none of it matters. You're absolutely right. But if Jesus, who claimed to be God, is God, then everything is like, everything matters because...
Are they not two separate people, like God and Jesus?
So, yes and no. That's like, this is the idea of the Trinity, which like... If you try to explain it more than what it is, you end up making a mistake. And that would be called like some kind of Trinitarian heresy is like the long word for it. But essentially, it would be some kind of heresy. So like if I tried to explain to you how the Godhead works using the Son, I'm going to end up making a mistake. But if we don't think about it too much, it kind of makes sense. So imagine God. I think you can look at the Son, and that's Jesus, right? The warmth you feel is the Holy Spirit, okay? And the sunlight and that produces, you know, photosynthesis and all this stuff, right? And the light that we see, that's God the Father. So the idea is these three characteristics is the Son, like the physical sun, the ball of light.
Okay.
Yeah, the sun, right? But they express themselves in three different ways, which is the Trinity. So you have the Holy Spirit, the Father, and Jesus.
Okay.
Does that kind of make sense?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So what it basically is, the Trinity works this way. So it's 3 in 1, 1 in 3. That the best way, like that's the most accurate way to say it without saying a mistake. So it's not that the three of them together makes God. They're all three God It's almost, again, bad example. It's like they're triplets that are like the same person. Okay. It's like three clones, except they serve different functions. So I guess, I don't know if this is a heresy or not. Like, I don't know if this is wrong, but another way that I've thought about it is, okay, imagine we all exist in three planes, right? We have our physical bodies, our minds, and our spirits. Easy enough. But there's simultaneous, like it's three different dimensions that live simultaneously, right? And so if that's the case, then Jesus is the physical expression of God. The Holy Spirit is the spiritual manifestation of God. And God the Father is the emotional manifestation of God. That might not be, like, somebody is going to listen to this and be like, yo, that's wrong, and da-da-da, and give me a bunch of Bible verses. Fine, whatever. But that's kind of how it works. So Jesus, the way Jesus lived his life, the way it was deeper than just he was a perfect person and didn't sin. He was fully obedient. Like he was fully obedient to the will of God. It's almost this sense of like, if you mimic someone so well, are you really mimicking them, or is there like, or are you them? You know what I mean? So, I mean, I don't know if that's even a good, sorry, that got dark. I don't know why. But yeah, I don't know if that's a good example either. But again, yeah, this is like, people have been burned at the cross for trying to figure out what the nature of this is, and then saying something wrong. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just kidding. No, but I mean, essentially that is, I know it's a complicated thing, but the simple answer is that Jesus is God. John 1:1 says that the Word was with God and the Word was God. And the Word here is Jesus. So it's like,
Okay.
So Jesus was with God and Jesus was God. Wait, hold up. If at any point in this you said, hey, I never thought about it like that, please subscribe. What are you doing, man? I'm trying to pay my bills. Okay, anyways, let's get back to the serious stuff. All right, see it.
Okay, so
Yeah.
is it basically saying like, by, I guess, just like trusting and believing in God, he became God himself?
No. He was an incarnation, basically. So essentially, his birth was miraculous. The virgin birth. That's why like Catholics hold Mary to such a high, the high esteem. Essentially, she had the miracle of giving birth to Jesus without like sex, which apparently is bad or whatever. But so
she's literally only praised because she gave birth.
Yeah, but it's like this thing of like, how can, like, for Jesus to be fully divine, fully man, then she has to be like a really like pure person.
I see. Okay.
And so like there's a, like, I'm gonna say myth, sorry Catholics, but there's this myth around her story that she was also immaculately conceived. She like didn't sin. She didn't even step on like the only place she stepped on was her bedroom and the temple. Like she never touched anything impure.
She's just floating in between.
Yeah, well no, she was literally carried. Like in the story, she was carried between the two. Yeah. So it's like this person was like uber holy and gave birth to Jesus. And I think that's a little crap, but that's sorry, you know. But yeah, the idea is that she was this brilliant, amazing person that gave birth to Jesus. As a Christian, she definitely had the faith, right? Because like the whole narrative is basically Joseph and Mary get married, and then Joseph is like, "You're pregnant, means you cheated on me," and she's like, "I swear I didn't." And then an angel came to Joseph, was like, "Hey, she's conceiving, like Jesus." Like, you know, it's fine. She was impregnated by the Holy Spirit, you know, whatever that means. And then he gave birth to Jesus, and Jesus. So I guess what makes him divine, he didn't manifest his divinity or anything. He was promised. So in the Old Testament, there was like a range of like 600 prophecies of what the Messiah would do on his time in his time on earth. He fulfilled all of those probabilities. And this, like, analytically, the probability of anyone fulfilling all those prophecies is like the closest thing to zero that could ever happen. So, like, this is, I think the probability is something like winning the lottery like 1,000 times in a row. Like,
to follow all of the prophecies.
Yeah, like the statistical probability is like the same. You know what I mean? It's like astronomically low. And so for Jesus to have fulfilled all those prophecies, to live as a sinless man, to die without, like, one of the prophecies, for example, is that he would never break a bone. And when he was being crucified, what the centurions would do to make sure they're dead, they would break their legs. Like, while they're hanging there, they would break their legs, and then there's like no way they could run off, whatever, if they survived the crucifixion, which in itself is like impossible to survive. And like there are people, this is like I think a line of Islamic thought was that he fooled everyone and didn't die. Well, there's two. He fooled everyone, didn't die, and ran off. And then the other one is that Judas looked like Jesus. He was like his twin or something, and took the place for Jesus. And so Jesus kind of
on the
cross. Yeah. So it's like both, like, come on, dude, you try better, you know. But because the idea is a Roman crucifixion, they would whip you. You've never seen Passion of the Christ, have you?
No.
It's such a gory movie. Well, at least that second half, because it's like, you know, his crucifixion. And so they like whip him, like bone marrow's coming out, blood's coming out. He's like pooping himself from just all of that. And then he has to carry his cross all the way to the thing. And then he gets nailed to the cross or hung. Like some people just, it was robes. And they would die by asphyxiation. Yeah. Because they would have to step, so they'd be nailed on their feet. They'd have to push up to breathe and then come back down. Well, they would get so tired of doing that, and it would hurt so much that they would just give up and choke on their blood, and like, because they're like this, and they're like, you know, and so that's how they would die. So the centurion, and then if that didn't work, they would break off the legs so they couldn't push up, and then they would just die, you know. So these guys were savages. And Jesus, the centurion noticed that he died before, like, the breaking of legs. So he just stabbed him through the ribs, through the lungs and heart, and then water and blood came out. And then I think one of the, I guess. So so no broken bones. So like that's not something he could control.
Because he died before they...
Exactly. So like that's one thing that like he fulfilled a prophecy that he didn't even have control of fulfilling. You know, so it's just stuff like that.
So is that why there's like a New Testament, like because there was too many prophecies in the first one?
No. So the Old Testament and the New Testament, what ends up happening is the Old Testament is essentially the Jewish Bible. So it's the Old Testament is like the creation story, right? Which is Genesis. But then there is also just historical narrative. Exodus is the story of when the Jews left Egyptian rule. There's, of course, miracles in there and stuff like that. But like this is a historically documented thing where there's a rebellion of the Jews against the Egyptian empire. Like they escaped and they just ran away. And it's like, how did, you know, these ragtag slaves like escape one of the greatest, you know, civilizations of its time? So there's that. And then it's like the Book of Kings. So like, which is literally just like, hey, this king lived for this long. This is what he did. And then it's like some real Game of Thrones stuff, like all the way through. It's crazy. And I was like reading through it, and I feel like the author for Game of Thrones kind of like grabbed a lot of these stories like and mixed them together. But yeah, essentially that's what happened. And then there's like poetry, there is Proverbs, and like that's all it is, right? Mm-hmm. And then you get to the New Testament, and what you have in the New Testament is 4 eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus. So
that weren't there in the Old Testament?
Right, because I guess the Old Testament ends around 400 BC. Mm-hmm. And so like that, and that's all they have. Because then there was like the Dark Ages, like the literal Dark Ages, that was like the 400 years before Christ. And then where the New Testament picks up is Matthew is one of the disciples. Okay, I don't want to get too like nerdy and historical, but essentially Mark might have been the first gospel written, which is the account of Peter, which is one of the disciples. Okay, so Peter, he had a translator named Mark. He was a doctor, and he basically translated whatever Peter said and put it down. So he has that. That's the first thing, and then Luke. So Luke is interesting. Luke is like maybe like a second generation Christian or a first generation Christian. And he was hired as a private investigator to figure out what happened with the life of Jesus. Mm-hmm. So like the way these books got compiled, like this is so nerdy, I'm sorry. But the way these books got compiled essentially was like, hey, how close to the main source can we get to the life of Jesus? Mm-hmm. And then they compiled these books together, or at least the 4 gospels. Like there's like 100 gospels, but these 4 seem legit, essentially. Mm-hmm. Where the other ones are like written like fantasy. Some of them are written in like 1000 AD, and it's like, you obviously did not know what happened in 30 AD. And see,
and that's the thing of why I'm like kind of curious about it, because things are being like rewritten and added, so it's just like I start to question like what's factual and what's being added to fit the Christian narrative.
I understand that question for sure. I think what happens is like the Gospel of Thomas, or like all of these other, there are some that like make it into the apocryphal books, which Catholics read, Protestants don't, because of that rigidity of like, I can't trust that this is honest. Mm-hmm. And that's like a very scholarly approach, I would imagine. I would say confidently that the best thinkers of the old world, I guess, of like, Europe and Asia, not Asia Minor, like basically Europe. Yeah, let's just say Europe. The best minds of Europe were, since everyone was Christian, then the best minds of Europe were also Christian. And they were like the theologians, they were the philosophers, they were the scholars, right? And so think about, I don't know, just any famous scholar just going through and trying to do detective work and trying to find, hey, are these... like, does this align to the narrative that I'm finding from outside sources, mm-hmm. right? So we know, like, the same reason we know that George Washington exists, with like letters he wrote, mm-hmm. or people writing about him, or, whatever the case is, the Battle of River Run, or Bull Run or whatever, right. And like knowing that he was there. So in the same way, that's how we know Jesus existed, because there are people like, oh, there's this guy named Jesus causing a muck mm-hmm. in Galilee, or whatever. And so we look at these outside sources. We look at like what this gospel says, right? Like the Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Matthew, Luke, and John. So we look at that and say, could this have happened? And there's nothing that contradicts otherwise. They'll even check things like, hey, the names that they're using, and like if they give them a nickname, it probably means that this name was common, mm-hmm. right? So Simon, for example, was a huge name in first century Jew. Mm-hmm. Like, as a first century Jew, your name might have been Simon. Mm-hmm. And so they always gave them a nickname. It was like Simon the tax collector, Simon the Pharisee, mm-hmm. Simon the whatever. Okay, so you can distinguish what Simon you're talking about. And then they look at, whether it's, historical accounts like censuses or whatever, and being like, oh, there was a lot of Simons, and so we can trust that these facts are true. And they would, break apart anything they possibly could to see if like, hey, is this a real story that is being told?
But aren't these stories like essentially like going back to God, like the beginning of time? Was there a time before Jesus or God? Because isn't the like story that he basically created mankind or like the universe or whatever?
Yeah, so like that's not necessarily provable, but even so if we because I guess what you're referring to is like the 6 days of creation, right? And was it literal 6 days and this and that? I think nowadays, especially most Christians, believe that this was some kind of either symbolic or poetic, in the sense that, well, and I've tried to argue with even apologists about this, because they say, oh, the Bible isn't a science book. Like, we're not supposed to be reading it that way. You're fooling yourself. But I do have this feeling that if truth is truth, whether it's representative truth, whether it's symbolic truth, it has to be true in essence. If we look at, because like, okay, so ancient Hebrews, they didn't have a category for like the difference between a bird, a falcon, and a mosquito. There was no difference. They were just flying beasts, right? So, or like grass, like trees, shrubs, and grass were kind of all just leafy things. And if you look at the order, at least, not the timetable, but the order in which things were created, it lines up to the scientific hypothesis of how life began on Earth. So I think that's one thing to consider about that. But again, like I know some people take it literal about, the 6 days of creation, but what ends up happening is that we understand that the Bible has different forms of literature. So in the same way that you wouldn't look at a poem and think it's literal, or a historical narrative as like entirely like accurately factual, and it's like trying to tell you something. It's like it's like the difference between like a biography and a memoir. Like a memoir might be a little more poetic in how it tells their story, and an autobiography is very stale, right, in a sense, And so historical narrative, like when we look at, the first few chapters of Genesis and being like, oh, the point, and there's also this point that's being made. All of the ancient stories of creation were all of this came out of chaos, out of God's infighting, out of, there was no order to anything. This story is almost satirical in a way that like says, no, you guys are all idiots. There is a God of the universe that intentionally and purposefully made like creation. And this creation is very good. And that was that line right there is juxtaposed to the current narrative at the time of like the material world is bad and spirituality is good. And the, like in the first few lines, you get all of that, where like God created things, chaos into order, there's order, and that order in that material world is good. It was created with intention. It was created to be beautiful. And so at the very least, that's what it's trying to communicate, And so, I think if you brush through the Bible and you say like, I tried all that and whatever. But like, if that's something that you didn't pick up on, then did you really try to like dig deep and try to understand? So I think, I don't know if that answers your question, right?
Yeah, no, it did, because that is one of like the main things that, I don't believe, because like it's just like that's just so far out there that I just don't believe that one person created like all of this. And so what an apologist would probably tell you or ask you is like, why is there life then as opposed to nothing? Like we live in a fine-tuned universe where if
a slight like decimal of gravity was messed up, nothing would exist. If we weren't exactly this distance from the sun, no life could exist. And so like the fine tuning of the universe, the fine tuning of Earth, the fine tuning of our bodies, like all of that, like couldn't have been created by accident, right? Like two non-living cells couldn't combine to create a living cell, right? And that's what I was kind of saying. Like, there's just too much coincidence for me to just throw out the narrative that maybe a God did create everything, And so that's where I say, like, you get to a point, if you really like, dig through all of the evidences, you're making a leap of faith regardless of where you go.
And I can see that because, there's things that I don't believe in, but I don't think about it in the other direction of, okay, well then what do I believe happened? But do I think like all of this is like miraculous? Yes, I do, because as you said, like everything is just so finely tuned, and me having a child, and that I grew, and I'm seeing like the life that I created, and growing, like every part of him is like amazing.
It's like, how can that happen?
Exactly. I don't know the reason, like how or why. I just assume, I don't know, something in science just
science.
Exactly. It just ended up just happening that way.
And for sure. And I think that might be like the Christian's critique, is that or there's this guy named Cliff Connectley who talks a lot about intellectual honesty. And he would essentially say, like, hey, you're not being intellectually honest if you're denying God, but not putting in the effort of, like, why are you denying God in the first place? Like, that's just like a cop-out thing of like, something scientific, and then you move on with your life, when really he would argue that this might be the most important question. This might be the most important thing, because, like, if the Bible is true, then the time that we spend on earth is a glimpse of the eternity that we will live. And that eternity is really decided on what you put your faith in, right?
And that's like the heaven that you're talking about?
Yeah. And then like hell, so if we imagine hell or heaven being like living at God's house, right? Because I know, like, hey, it's not fair that I'd go to hell for not believing in Jesus. Like, I'm a good person, but really what it is if, like, again, let's break out of the Trinity, for example, but if God is really like the dad of the house, right? And he has a son, and his name is Jesus, and he only allows people in the house that want to play with Jesus. And you're like, I don't like Jesus, I don't want to hang out with him. And then God is like, well, then why do you want to be in my house? You know what I mean? And so the idea of heaven is, it's not about if you're a decent person. Like, because again, if you're like, I want to hang out with Jesus, and you're like the biggest troublemaker ever, he could be like, yeah, but you're a little troublemaker. You're fine. Like, come in. You want to hang out with my son? That's cool. But if you don't want to hang out with Jesus, it's like, well, then what are you doing here? And so I know that the narrative of hell has changed to this idea that it's just separation from God. And that does explain a lot of things away. Because if you understand, so like people argue, like, if God exists, why is there so much evil in the world? But the premise of that question implies that you believe that there should be good in the world, and if God is the good in the world, and evil then exists because of the lack of God in the world. And so if you understand that God is all the goodness and everything that could be, and being itself even, if that is God, then stepping outside of God is not existing. It could be So yeah, some people will say your soul lives on, but it lives on with nothing to grasp onto. So it's this like eternal longing, and that's what hell is. It's this, I would think of it as like ruminating, right? So like on this earth, even if you don't believe in God, there's still a chance that you could forgive yourself for whatever, of a horrible thing you feel like you've done. And that's an extension of God's love and grace, even for his enemies. And so, but imagine a place where there is no grace, like, because that's like an act of grace for that cycle of self-hatred to stop. If you don't believe in God, that's like definitely an act of grace and mercy. But in hell, that might not be the case. So you might ruminate on your, whatever shame you have, you might ruminate on that for all of eternity, because you don't have this person, this being that around you can like melt that off of you,
And so what about people who believe in different gods?
Yeah.
Or do they, like, how do you look at them? Like, are they all like just different versions of the same God?
Yeah, no. But here's what's really interesting to me is that every major religion involves Jesus in some way, which is to me like mind blowing. So for Muslims, he's a prophet. For Hindus, some people think he's Brahma, he's Shiva, an avatar. So the incarnation of a divine being. Jews either think he didn't exist or that he was like a liar and false prophet, from what I understand at least. But yeah, these other major religions all hold him high in esteem. So I think that all religions or all walks of life can lead to Jesus, but only through Jesus can we go to the Father, And so to me, what's strange is that, Islam, like Muslims, believe that Jesus was a prophet, yet they don't hear him out for his own words, right? Only the Christian Bible has like red letters, which essentially these are exact quotes of Jesus talking, right? And so they don't consider that. They believe he's a great prophet, but they don't know what he says, which to me is ironic, And so, yeah, that becomes a thing. And I only believe that because Jesus himself said, none can come to the Father except through me. And that he's the way and he's the truth and he's the life. And like no major religion, like Muhammad never said that, Buddha never said that. And he said he was enlightened, right? So, and this is an exercise I do too, is let's assume that all religions are true, right? And all the leaders are who they say they are. Well, Muhammad was a prophet. Buddha was an enlightened teacher. Jesus says he's God, And so even if we accept all religions to be true, one person claims to be God, dies, and supposedly resurrects himself and says, like, I have power over death and I give you resurrection as well. So, like, we're talking about like Tien, Krillin, and Goku. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't compare. So that's that's the analysis I guess I've done in terms of like weighing other religions to see like, oh, what's up with that. And yeah,
that's interesting. I don't really know anything when it comes to like Jesus or God. I've never just felt interested enough to do any research, but just knowing that other religions have also mentioned him in some sort of way is interesting. So I always just kind of wondered, like, do they get into heaven as well? Or, I guess whatever their version of heaven is. I know that there's a religion that believes in like reincarnation.
You were saying a lot of religions have their own kind of heaven.
Their version of heaven. And then I know that there's, others that just believe in like you were saying, like the soul doesn't just die. And other religions believe in reincarnation. And, I don't really believe in much. I have hope that reincarnation is real.
Yeah.
Because I guess I do kind of believe that your soul doesn't just die, and that explains why some people have very old souls. And I have been dabbling in the Satanic Temple. Yeah.
That's funny. No, I hear you. And satanic being, it's not really that spiritual, right? It's not Satanist. It's Satan. Oh, wait.
The Satanic Temple.
Satanic. That's like the dark art stuff. No.
I'm
confused. Yeah, I don't know which, because I know there's a difference.
There is two. I don't really know that quite that much because I'm just kind of like now like looking into it. I just know the like the 7 tenets that come from it. All are just things that just kind of align with like my personal beliefs.
Yeah. I know the 7 tenets. They are very human. Mm-hmm. Humanistic.
Yeah.
And that's what, like, this is what is weird to me, is like, so, like, okay, you know how there are these Christians that think everything is demonic and everything is, like, evil and this and that?
Yeah.
I'm like, bro, give me a break. But then these 7 tenets are, like, just natural, normal things, mm-hmm. but they're totally, like, I mean, Satan means like this is like textbook. I don't know how. It's not the deceiver. It's the opposition. It's something like the opposition. I'm forgetting. Oh my gosh, dude, don't cook me. But it's just like the opposer essentially against God. And so if the worshiping practice that is against God is these very natural, organic things, that makes me raise an eyebrow, one. And then the second thing, I'm forgetting it too. Holy crap. No, there's, it's like directly against God's commands. Mm-hmm. So like things like indulge yourself, mm-hmm. when a huge Christian practice is to like deny yourself and deny your flesh and mm-hmm. deny, these desires that ultimately can be destructive. Mm-hmm. Or things like Jesus saying, turn your cheek and forgive those who hurt you and things like that. Mm-hmm. And it saying something like, pay them back like 10 times harder mm-hmm. for whatever they do to you, That's
interesting because I feel like that goes against one of the tenets that it has, where it's if you cause harm, do your best to like rectify it.
Rectify being
like the harm that you've caused.
Oh, no. Yes. If you cause harm to someone mm-hmm. that didn't deserve it, you rectify that. Mm-hmm. But I think in one of the tenets, it's if someone hurts you, you pay them back.
No, I see. Okay, yeah.
Where Jesus would say, you forgive them and mm-hmm. try to break the cycle of hatred. Mm-hmm. And so it's just stuff like that that's like, these like normal organic feelings, when it's written down, you do this, and then you compare that to what Jesus says, and you're like, this is anti-Jesus, mm-hmm.
Obviously,
as a Christian, I'm going to tell you, hey, don't dabble in that.
Well, I already joined. I'm waiting on my member card.
They give you the little devil horns and the fangs.
I'll let you know when I go to one.
Oh no. Oh man. But yeah, so that's what goes on there. And I do kind of understand the appeal. I think if we don't, like, again, I guess I can call it the privilege of understanding, like, no matter where I was, in my faith or whatever, I knew that there was a God and there was order and there was something to be subject to if I chose it or not. Mm-hmm. And I think what is appealing to Satanists is if that doesn't exist, then this is exactly the kind of community you would want, mm-hmm. right? Which is just defining the things that I already do, and having a community mm-hmm. to be a part of, right? But then my thing is like, just join an anime club or something, girl. You don't have to go that deep, you know?
mean, I'm not a religious person, like, whatsoever. Really, I'm kind of just, like, dabbling and, like, looking around. But it is mostly the tenets that have, like, just kind of caught my interest, because essentially it just seems like, you know, kind of just don't be a piece of shit of a person. Yeah. And, like, also, like, just live your life the way that you want to live it, which for me, a lot of Christians seem to really care about other people and the way that they live their lives. And there's just a lot of like hatred that comes off the community, and they want Christianity to be involved in everything, which I'm so tired of seeing. Interesting.
Okay. So on that point, I think what ends up happening is, and we've already like kind of talked about this, an unexamined Christian is going to be very hateful. And what that ultimately what that means, it's a teaching of Jesus, which maybe you've heard, is how can you worry about the speck in someone else's eye when there's a log in your own eye, right? So the idea is hypocrisy in a sense, but it's deeper than just hypocrisy, because if you take out the log in my eye, I can see your speck more clearly. I can see it for what it is. Mm-hmm. So in the same way that, like, we talked about, yes, the Bible, you know, defines how we should express our sexuality and this and that. For heterosexual relationships, homosexual, polysexual relationships, all of that. When I take out the log in my own eye and I understand my sexuality and I understand how that can be destructive and this and that, I don't come at you with like a homophobic vibe. Mm-hmm. You know, I come at you with this thing of like, hey, maybe what you're doing could be destructive, mm-hmm. you know, because I have an insight into it because I've checked myself, mm-hmm. right? And so that's one aspect is, the same way that there's like bad cops, even like the idea of policing is good, but there are bad cops. The same thing is, idealistically, Christianity is the best way to live life and best for society and best for the world. But there are a lot of bad apples that misrepresent it in such a way that no one wants it. Mm-hmm. And I completely understand that. But my second point is that if Christianity is the truth, then you would want it to be in everything, you know? Like you wouldn't want... So like a huge conversation is about like media and like art and, you know, which involves music as well, mm-hmm. right? Like you don't want music to perpetuate sexuality in such a way that, or art to perpetuate sexuality in such a way that creates destructive behavior. And what I mean by that is like, cool, you know, sleeping around is whatever, mm-hmm. but there might be consequences like children without fathers, mm-hmm. for example. That's not something that should be perpetuated, you know, mm-hmm. like I and this is kind of the hard line is, yes, liberty is something that is amazing. But Paul, and this is another thing about the Bible. So the first 4 books is like eyewitness accounts of what Jesus did. The rest is essentially philosophy and practical advice of how to live out. Like if Jesus is true and resurrected, mm-hmm. and he loves you and he died for you, then what does that life look like? And that's essentially the rest of the New Testament. Mm-hmm. Just people like pastors writing letters to mm-hmm. churches and saying, hey, this is what you're doing wrong. This is what you're doing right. This is how you should be thinking about it. So yeah, that's why like, the New Testament is a bunch of like blah, blah, blah. It's just like historical account and then philosophy. Like mm-hmm. that's essentially what it is. And sorry, I got to check time. 10:30. We're good. Boom. I'm just kidding. What are we talking about? I don't know. But yeah. So if that's the truth, what I was going to say is there is a Bible verse when Paul is writing to one of his churches. He says, "Look, I have the liberty to do everything, and with Christ, with the grace that He's given me, I can do whatever I want. But not everything will benefit me." Mm-hmm. You know, and so that's the wisdom that now he lives under, and that we should maybe live under. Which again, it's like, look, I can be polyamorous, I can be, all these things, but is that going to benefit me long term? And that kind of wisdom can come along with Christian media, Christian, music, whatever, which is, yeah, cool, sleeping around, that's all cool and dandy, but is that going to benefit me? Like, is that actually good and fruitful for my life? And I think the answer is no. There's the instant gratification, but then the consequences, it's like, a lot can happen.
That I do agree with.
Yeah.
I have never been the person to kind of like do that.
Yeah.
I need to have like a strong like bond and trust with someone before I can do something like that. So that I do agree with. But I mean, I kind of just let, people just make their own decisions.
For sure.
But it's just really the whole, trying to control my life, and then being like as a woman, a lot of Christians have a lot of opinions about women and what we should and shouldn't do. Like abortion or our own health care. And reproductive rights.
Yeah. And again, that is super, like, again, the whole log in the eye thing. I think if they understand where women come from when they want that, maybe the outcome doesn't change, right? I still would rather not have abortions happen. But I have a little more empathy for those who do. Because at the end of the day, the psychological trauma that they go through, like, just like everything that, because that's the thing, it's like either side feels like there's no nuance there, right? Like the people that are like, my body, my choice, and I'll abort whoever I want, it's like you're going through trauma. You're putting your body through trauma. You're putting your mind, your heart, your soul through trauma. But then on the other side, it's like, yeah, just have the kid and take care of it. And it's like, well, the reason they have this decision is because they can't take care of the kid, or they don't feel like they have the capability or the community to take care of the kid. And like, that's the other thing is, like, I think honestly, Christians who are that adamant about it should put their money where their mouth is in terms of like, hey, have the kid and I will take care of you until the kid is 18 or whatever,
Yeah. And like, that's the thing. It's very much like, against abortions, but then once the child is born, it's just like, okay, well, where is the help now that they're going to get? Because most people who don't want abortions, it's like, I don't have the money. Maybe their mental health isn't right. They don't have a partner. And, that's why there's a lot of like kids in the foster system.
Exactly.
As someone who was like in a home, like it's just really sad to see.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And because I used to think of it as a mercy killing, because it's like, do I want a dead baby or a school shooter? You know what I mean? Like those are your options, essentially, most of the time, because that's like the statistic is, kids that don't grow up with their family, they're gonna do horrible things. And so it's like, there's no right to this. And then you have to take a step back before then. It's like, well, what are we teaching women? Like, it's almost like a right now so far. It's like and I'm not advocating to like freaking put lock boxes, or whatever. But it's like, it's my body, my choice until I'm pregnant. And then it's the government's choice or whatever. Like, that's not cool. But the thing is, if we take that step back, not teach morals, that's hilarious, that's actually like foul. but teach the importance of, I don't want to even say abstinence or celibacy, but just like of picking
better partners.
Yeah, better partners, right?
Because I do view that kind of the same way as well, because of like how I am as a person. Like, I need to know and trust someone before I even like have sex with them. And it's just like, well, maybe you should take your homework a little bit more on your partner,
right?
So I can see that.
Yeah. And that's kind of where like it gets complicated. And I think that's the confusion, is some people are very well-meaning of like, look, I know you're going to hate me for this and this and that, but ultimately, this is best for, society and best for you. But they don't have that communicate. Like, there's just no love in that. And I totally respect that way of thinking, of like you thinking like, dude, they're all up in my business and they don't care, right? It would be different if they're all up in my business, but they do care, right? But that's not what's communicated and that's not what's felt. And yeah, I mean, like the a-holes are going to say, but it's still the right thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not how Jesus moved. He did the right thing, but also the right way. That just doesn't transform people's lives, right? And we've seen like what ends up happening with Jesus is he hangs out with a bunch of sinners his whole ministry. He's hanging out with prostitutes, he's hanging out with thugs and thieves. But the thing is him caring about this person's life and him being and walking alongside these people, they realize that almost like they can eat the cake and have it too, which is, and it's not like I can continue in my lifestyle and be with Jesus. It's I'm being seen and heard by this person who loves me, and I want to be, not even I want to be better for this person, but I mean, maybe that's a sense, and maybe that's a starting point for a lot of people. But this it's, I mean, I gave the teddy bear analogy, and it's like a ridiculous one. I know there's the meme and everyone dogs on it, but that idea of like if abortion is that little teddy bear, right? And it's like, no, I want autonomy. Like I want to control my life and control like the outcomes of my life. And Jesus is saying, hey, I have something way better if you trust me, right? But that relationship has to be built, of course. And we talked about, like, you maybe start with the small things, right? Like for me, it was I tithed. I trusted God with my money. He blessed me with money. Or, not money, but like financial opportunities and this and that. And so then I could trust him in other areas of my life that I held tighter. And that becomes the process of surrender and giving your life to Jesus. It's not this like, listen to a sermon, give your life to Jesus, and everything is fine now, which a lot of Christians hold, right?
Yeah.
And it's way more organic. It's a long process. It's a tough process because there's always backstepping, right? Like I was faithful in tithing, and then like me and my wife kind of went broke for a little bit. I had to get a second job, and I stopped giving money, like, stopped offering money to God because I was like, I can't afford it. And I felt guilty, but it's like, well, I mean, I wouldn't even call that a backstepping. I think my problems with like pornography or like women or whatever, that was probably like backstepping a lot. But like as life is complicated, our walk with Jesus is just as complicated. And that's not very openly talked about. And I think it makes someone like you say, well, you think you're just all perfect and dandy, and now you're expecting me to live that life, and I'm nothing like you, and like stop bothering me. And that's not the case.
It's not that I think, y'all's lives are perfect and dandy, because I have seen, like people in my family who had a very rough life with like alcoholism and drugs and sex, and then, they turn things around, and they're much happier now. So it's usually the people that I think are some of like the most, like, I guess, devoted are the ones that had a really a hardship life. It's just,
I have a take on that, but keep going.
Okay. That's kind of, I think that's about where that is.
Okay. So, because my dad had the same experience, right? We talked about his like the failed abortion and this and that, and my dad was like he was living the rock star life at like 12 years old. So he was like with hookers, snorting coke. Like this guy was, I mean, the man kind of like at the time.
Yeah.
But he was just exposed to all of that. He was making mad money with his uncle and this and that. And that was just what he was doing. Up until, I don't know, like 17 or 14. 14 is kind of like when he started having encounters with God, and he was like, no, that's not for me. And then like 17, he was like, okay, like I'm done with this life. Like I give my life to you. And then he went on this like crazy 180, like hardcore, like I live for God and everything is demonic and evil and I'm going to destroy all these things, right? And then only in his like late 30s did he soften up a bit through therapy and this and that, because he started dealing with like the emotional stuff God wanted to deal with, right? What ends up happening to a lot of Christians is that like it's all ego driven and passion driven, no matter what side. And that's kind of that's a tough thing to like tell another Christian, is like, this whole like obsession with being a good person or whatever is totally ego. It's totally like the way that you would justify you being a good person by having, your cars and the women and this and that. All you've done is flip the script and now saying, oh, I follow Jesus better than everyone else. Yeah. And that's now your shtick. But it's this, in the heart of it, it's the same exact thing. And so that doesn't represent Christianity. Like even getting your life together, being happier, doesn't quite necessarily mean that they're walking with Jesus well, right? Because the idea of Christianity is, I wanted to talk about how, like, okay, even if all the other religions, like, achieving nirvana or whatever, like being one with nothing, that sounds like hell. Like if you it sounds like very, like, oh yeah. But if you
not having a belief in anything,
no, cease being. Like when you stop existing. What?
I see.
You know what I mean? So yeah. But that's just a thought experiment that I've had of like.
But
okay,
you would have no consciousness, right? Like if
maybe, but then. Yeah, I don't know. But then I don't know if you want to stop existing. Like the Bible also talks about how...
I mean, personally, no, because that's why I have hope that reincarnation is real, and then you just you just keep having another life.
Yeah. Well, at least the idea within like Hinduism about reincarnation is that you keep reincarnating until you've reached perfection, and then once reached detachment, and then once you've done... I guess it depends on the sect of Hinduism, honestly, or Buddhism. Yeah, it's a lot. Actually, I watched a video about Hinduism, and it's essentially like it's an encompassing word for all of these different Indian religions that come together. But there's no they just tried to like mesh everything together. Yeah. So I guess that's not a thing. But sorry, going back. Wow, definitely had a ADHD moment there with you. That was crazy.
I'm rubbing off on you.
Yeah, I know. No, so don't know what we're talking about. What are we talking about?
I don't remember.
I guess we're ending it here, guys. I'm just kidding. I kind of do have to go, though. Yeah. Oh, my gosh. This is, like, so anticlimactic for anyone watching. They're like, you were just getting to the good part or something. I know. But yeah, follow Jesus. It's good for you. Christianity being the sense of like the ultimate goal.
Oh, like being like a good person or something.
Yeah. And that's not the ultimate goal. That's a byproduct of what happens when you...
Because I think you could be a good person without Jesus.
Exactly.
Because I think I'm a pretty good person.
I think so too. I actually think you're a better person than I am. And we've talked about that. Yeah. I'm like, I have to analyze the consequences. I don't think of like, oh, this is a good thing. Like, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not motivated by being a good person. I'm motivated by efficiency and like, doing being the most fruitful or whatever, which isn't a good person quality.
I mean, it could also... I actually used to be a very big people pleaser for a really long time, and I think that this kind of comes from just wanting to be accepted by people. Giving people what they wanted. But now, I definitely like try to do my best to be like a good person, and I don't necessarily think you need Jesus or just faith to do that. I guess just faith in yourself, really.
Yeah. And I understand. And that's totally satanic. Yeah. I hear you. So, but what the challenge becomes with Christianity is you just, it is a weird thing to say, but you just love Jesus so much, because they call it like an encounter. When you encounter Jesus, it's this, like, the only way to explain it is you have an experience where you realize that God is real, that Jesus is real, and he's present, and he's with you. That is, whatever that feeling is, whatever that looks like, you will know when you have it as you pursue Jesus. What happens then is that it kind of like changes the filter a little bit of how you see the world. And you realize that this is like that nothing really matters other than Jesus, and so you pursue him. I think a function of that is that you, like, why you deny yourself, for example, is because you're trying to make more room and more space for Jesus. It's like it becomes like being with a partner, where you have to, like, there's certain habits and mannerisms that you do that just aren't compatible with your partner, and you love your partner so much that you're willing to shed off these mannerisms to please them more or to be with them more, right? Like if let's say you love tuna and they can't stand the smell of it and they won't like kiss you or whatever, you're gonna eat tuna whenever you know you're not gonna kiss them or whatever, but you're going to stop eating tuna to be with this person. And that kind of hints at sometimes there's a thing that you don't think is bad, but it does block you from having more of Jesus, and you're like, I'd rather have more of Jesus than have this thing that might be neutral in my life, and that becomes our walk with Jesus, our faith with Jesus, and essentially, like, what's beautiful about like the Trinity, right? Going back full circle, is that they are in perfect unison, perfect love, and we were never designed to be alone. And God created us this way because he was never alone. He always had, himself, I guess, but in a very, metaphysical, like outside of this universe kind of way. No way. Hey guys, thank you so much for going on this journey with me. If you like the content, please like, subscribe, follow, and remember, there is more to life, and that is good news. Thank you guys so much. Have a great day.